Well, good afternoon again, everybody, and good afternoon to everyone watching us and joining us on the live stream. Really great to have you with us, back with Business Insights 22.1. This is Solution Storming, and I'm joined by a lovely pile of people around me on my screen that I can see now. And this esteemed group of people were gathered a little bit earlier this afternoon for a session called Question Storming, which addressed a really important question, which I'll let our facilitator Sandra talk about in a minute. And what we're then going to do is now look at the outcomes and the thoughts about that, and explore a little bit further now in this session what that's all about. So before I go any further, let me introduce Sandra Beer from Personal Cities, who is our facilitator for both the question and the solution storming. Sandra, over to you.
Thank you, Pete. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Sandra Bear, CEO of Personal Cities. It's a company based in Washington, D.C. and focused on really helping cities understand their identity, their brand, and how to make their cities stronger, more resilient. I'm currently in Los Angeles, California, and happy to have hosted our first, earlier today, a question storming session. Excuse me. Question storming is a unique approach to problem solving. It simply states a complex problem and then asks people to not answer it, not jump to answers, but to just keep asking questions, to sort of peel the onion and to delve more deeply into how this question is evaluated and assessed, and how it could be perhaps solved at some future point. So we had an amazing session this morning with the people you see on the screen today. The question that we asked was, how can a city use its culture to create a sustainable community where people are proud to live, work, and visit? So this is a difficult question. This is not an easy answer. This is a question that has no simple solution. And when I say that we're going into solution storming, it's really a term of art that says what we're looking for now, after we spent 30 minutes asking a bunch of questions, what are the insights you've gained? Why do you like this approach of just asking questions and not immediately having an answer? You know, it's so interesting for most of us when we're young, we'll ask our mother or our father a question and they'll answer it. As we grow up, when we go to school, we ask a teacher, you know, what is the answer to this question? And she or he will answer it. So we're sort of trained to give answers quickly. This process says, don't do that. This process says, take more time. Take time and space to ask questions so that you really understand the problem. This morning, based on that question, the answers were quite interesting, very much outside of the box, I think. Everything from how do you define culture, how do you define community, to what does it mean to be proud of where you live and work? We weren't answering these questions, we were asking them. We also talked about really provocative questions about who owns the process of defining your culture? What is it that controls the priorities for defining culture? I love these questions about, you know, what's the difference between history and heritage? And there was an interesting question that if you have a past culture of which you're ashamed, how do you deal with that in going forward? So, and then I think the other interesting questions were around leadership and hearing all the voices, understanding who should be heard in defining a culture and shaping it and rethinking it. So that's where we are today. I would like to now go around this group of people and ask each of them to sort of introduce themselves to you, name and location and line of work if they have one, and also to give us a couple insights, to give Pete, Allison, and me some insights about how did this process work for you? Did it resonate? Is it a good way to look at a problem? And also your specific insights, one or two ideas that really, wow, I hadn't thought of it that way, or you know, this is a new kind of thinking that gets me to a different approach rather than the traditional way of doing things. So I wonder, could we start, Rachel, with you? And introduce yourself, please, and give us your insights.
Sure, thanks very much for that, Sandra. So I'm Rachel Nash. My business is called Smart Office Support. And I provide a remote PA social media project support predominantly to small business owners. But one thing I was going to mention here, as a small business, we are actually carbon neutral and looking to go carbon positive in the future. But one of the things I've been doing on the project side is I've been working with my local neighbourhood, my local town council actually, in creating our local neighbourhood plan. And going through this process today, what has been really interesting is that we've pulled out a lot of those questions ourselves from a small area. So it was quite interesting to hear all those questions, because there's things we haven't considered. So I know personally I'm going to take some of this away and talk to the steering group, because I think there are things that's been learnt through here. We also have actually been asking some of those questions, for example, who owns our neighbourhood plan on behalf of the neighbourhood? And I know that kind of scenario was opened and asked a few times, and who's going to make the decision on these things as to what it is. Now, there is actually a referendum that will happen for the neighbourhood plan, so the local community do it. So I found this really interesting, but the main bit I found really interesting was the bit on culture. How we it was just, yes, where do you begin? Where do you end? What is it? What is it not? That I thought was really, really interesting.
Yeah, good. Do you, in asking the question about who owns the neighborhood decisions, are you creating new, broader coalitions to come to that answer? Because I think the way it's been done in the past is sort of, you know, the city leaders or the town council or the city council sort of make decisions. And yes. I fear that they've never been collaborative enough. What's your sense of that, Rachel?
So they have been, to be fair. I think a couple of the questions raised that earlier about getting people to engage. How do you get them to do that? How do you get them to buy into it? How do you do? And we've had all those problems. We've got local people who were saying, oh, well, it's just the town council who's doing it. But actually the town council is making it happen. But there are volunteers who are actually doing all the work.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's just not getting communicated enough. That's another one of my pet peeves, you know. But if you're doing good work, get it out there.
Absolutely. But some people, you will never change their mind.
Well, that's probably a good point. Tori, introduce yourself, please, and tell us your insights.
I'm Tori. I'm from North Carolina, and I work with Social Current, which is based out of DC. They're a digital marketing organization. And my insights were mostly about the importance of hearing every voice, no matter how small. And I feel like that's something that is like important for people across the board, which is good to hear, I guess, you know. And then just like how culture varies for each person and everyone's perception of it. And how they embrace it. Yeah.
Well, back to your point about hearing every voice, how do you see that happening? I take it you're social media savvy, and I'm wondering, you know, are we still able to hear voices digitally as well as in person? I mean, what are the mechanisms now to hear all the voices?
I guess like through personal experience, when making decisions like within our own organization, we take like a lot of polls from everybody.
Do you?
As a whole. But I think that digitally is a good way to hear like a large variety of voices, because there's all kinds of people on the internet, and a lot of they can use that to their benefit. I mean, you can be as open and honest, or you can like hide yourself.
Right.
To a certain degree.
How did you find this experience, Tori, just asking the question like this?
I thought it was really fun and interesting. I like asking questions and hearing the types of questions that other people want to know the answers to. I'd like to talk more about the answers.
I'm glad to hear that. I mean, of course, I think we were talking to Haley earlier, you know, what are the solutions? Well, let's chop. Let's get to them. But I think this process helps us perhaps slow down a bit, and think through the difficulty of it. Haley, could you give us your introduction and insights?
Yeah, okay, so my name's Hayley Ash. I live in Bristol. I've worked in local authorities for over 20 years, predominantly working with communities or managing teams that work within communities to enable them to get a voice, to engage with local devolved democratic processes. A lot of that has been done to neighbourhood planning as well. Several of my areas have been involved in neighbourhood planning and have neighbourhood plans, as well as community plans. I've also managed projects linked to city resilience, smart cities, and I'm currently working at the operations centre in Bristol, working with the teams there to start to look at how we can reshape their service.
Interesting. Do you, I mean, Bristol, to my knowledge, in studying smart cities is one of those. Do you find that there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm around making Bristol, continuing to make Bristol a smart city, a high-tech city, you know, a city with a lot of interesting talent there?
I think Bristol's a very innovative place, and it always likes to be a leader. Now, of course, when you're a leader in these new technologies, there are quite a few pitfalls, and you do sometimes, you know, not everything is as successful as you would like it to be, but well, somebody has to make those mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, God willing, we'll learn from them. Yeah,
that's right. And Bristol's quite prepared to be in that place, learning as they're going, and working collaboratively across. Well, it was across Europe, the project that I was managing. And there is definitely an aspiration to continue that work.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Pete, give us your, well, reintroduce yourself again and give us your insights and your view of this question storming thing.
Interesting. It's been absolutely fascinating. Pete Allison, I run a business called County Business Shows. Having prior to that spent the best part of 30 to 40 years originally in the as a lighting designer in the touring music industry and production manager, and then for about 20 years managing and delivering arts festival sites. And that probably is highly relevant because basically Greenfield Arts Festival is a big community that you put together. You know, you invite 20,000 people into your back garden for the weekend, and that's quite a moment. And that's sort of what you do. And so it's absolutely fascinated me over the years about you know, when you have that happening and you have that sheer level of dynamic flux going on amongst people and situations, how that communicates with itself, how it addresses it in the context of course, a cultural arts festival, because that's what it is. But the likes of someone like me has to also sort out the portable toilets and someone setting their tent on fire and the roads getting blocked, and you know the run-of-the-mill stuff, which hopefully the bands on stage don't get too involved in, and that kind of game. So that's my background and what I do, and that's how I come to this. Also, just for transparency, County Business Shows is obviously the business that owns the brand that is Business Insights, and actually so this is all our fault basically, and it's here. And
thank you very much.
Yeah, welcome. And we got to know Sandra because we run regional events. They're festivals of business and innovation, and they run across the southwest of the UK, and we get involved in this whole placemaking agenda and a lot of other things as well relevant to this placemaking agenda right across the southwest in some of the major areas across there. So that's all been a really fascinating backdrop. In COVID, we put it online, and Business Insights was a result. We met Sandra, and the rest is, as they say, history. What did I see about this? Well, with that backdrop in place, I think there are three things I would pull out of what happened earlier this afternoon. First of all, it's obvious when you say it like this, but it is so important. When we talk about the word culture, of course, this is no one simple thing that is a culture. So I've just jotted down here ethnic cultures, arts cultures, work cultures, hospitality, food and bev cultures, and you know, I just jotted 4 down, but you could go forever on that. And of course, those are all relevant cultures. And if we are looking at this question of how does a city use its culture, then for me there's a starting point of saying, well, good question, and which one are we talking about? And actually, of course, we're talking about them all. So how do they all interact? And it all starts there. And that leads on to my second point, really, is something that sort of crept into my mind sort of by osmosis as we were going through these questions and they were coming out. managing the conflict of cultures is a really big part of how you find your way through all this. And that itself, I think, has got two angles. One is managing conflicting cultures that are different cultures. So, you know, how do you manage the conflict that can happen between work culture and home life and arts or ethnic, you know, because, you know, you want to be at home or you want to be out doing things, but you want to be at work, and where does work finish and domestic and leisure time begin? And those are different cultures that sit in conflict at times. But it also sits within. So if we look, the easy and obvious one to look at is the ethnic cultures, you know, the racial divisions that sit, you know. I know Sandra and I, you know, we've talked about this before. Sandra sat in Washington, D.C., and I know you flew right back into the middle of the Black Lives Matter invasion of the White House, going back a year or two, which was, with hindsight, probably a humorous thing to look at, but of course not humorous at all in any shape or form. But that is the classic and easy thing to look at when you say a conflict within a culture. But even if you go to the arts, even if you refine it further down to music, you say, look, I love punk rock and I love classical opera. That is a conflict. It's there and it's ready to go. And is that a conflict, or is that sympathetic? And stop there, Peter. So that goes on to the third thing, which, when you pick those two things up, something that's fascinated me forever, really, within the business of what I've been doing career-wise for my life, is communications within a society about potentially conflicting cultures. So if I go back into that festival environment, which is a little bit of why I mentioned it, because I knew I was going to say this, you know, there's me doing an intensely operational job with people who are in their leisure time, so they really don't want to get told what to do, and I'm not paying them to do it anyway, so they block the road. It's their leisure time, they're enjoying themselves, or they get into a big mosh pitch in front of a really popular band and they want to enjoy themselves. But, you know, we've got health and safety, we've got other people to bring into that play, so we become the centerpiece of managing those conflicts of culture, which is about, I want to enjoy myself, yet I'm doing that within a big group of people. So how do I enjoy myself if it's going to potentially bring a problem for somebody else? And that's communicating that and managing that through. So there you go. I'm going to stop there.
Great.
Great. Back to you.
No, it's so interesting that your background in music, et cetera, has morphed into the county business shows, which are all over the map in terms of important issues around our planet, our cities, our world, et cetera. So thank you, Pete. I want to turn to Carla. I know you have to run in a little bit, so I wanted to get your introduction and your insights about what you heard today and what you think of this process as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Carola Mandelo. I'm the Executive Director of Smart City Works Innovation Hub. We're based in Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia. And we're a nonprofit, and we focus on solving urban challenges through technology and innovation that foster greater economic development. And in terms of the process, I had never done it before, and I absolutely would love to do it again. And I think it's a great way to start any discussion. So, and you know, you were saying, you know, take a moment to do active listening. And I found myself this morning having to actually, you know, turning off so I could do the active listening with, yes, you know, sitting very comfortably. You know, so it was something that I had never done before, and I absolutely appreciate it. And I think, you know, if you weave through, in some ways, I would love to see the questions, because there's definitely some common threads and some, I know we are all kind of, to a certain extent, impatient for the solution part of this. But if you weave all of those questions, there's definitely like common threads, and I'm particularly interested. And I don't have any insight, but I'm, you know, a lot of what Pete just said resonated with me, and I'm preoccupied and interested in inclusivity as cities grow. And that has very much to do with, when we talk about culture, what exactly do we mean? And how are we able to have a sustainable and resilient and livable city that includes as many of us and that it's inclusive of all the different cultures. So I think one of the first questions is, what are we defining culture and how, and it's a real challenge. So I think, not to repeat what Pete said because he's much more eloquent than I am, but I'm on board with those insights. That I find that's for the big metropolitan areas, that's a real challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and isn't it interesting that from your perspective, dealing with smart cities and helping to improve the economic viability of a place, I mean, there's so many other things to consider, and it really is complex and complicated.
Yes, and it's interesting because a lot of the initial thinking, and I think that's what I loved about the session this morning, is the hard stuff, the infrastructure, the sewage systems, the water, and now with COVID is, we work a lot with out there technologies, so the sensors and the drones and I really like going back to the culture, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of us go immediately to engineering and so for me it was great to put culture back in the forefront.
Well, thank you for that. I was worried that the question was a little bit too long and complicated, but as I say, you all took it and ran with it. Thank you very much. And interesting also, Carola, that you mentioned how you want to get to an answer. I mean, I think that's human nature almost, right? You ask a question, you want to get an answer, but there's a conflict, there's a disconnect between our sense of urgency to solve this problem and the need to dissect it more thoughtfully. Yes. And I think that's what this process is supposed to point that out to you. So I hope, it sounds like you definitely gained that from here. So I'm very, very glad about that.
Absolutely. And thank you to all of you.
Yeah. And I know you need to run soon, so thank you. I want to, before I go to Heather Booth, I want to go to Haley. I think, Haley, you mentioned to me that you wanted to talk a little bit more about the process and your perceptions of it.
I thought the session before was absolutely amazing. I don't think it's at all the time I'm going to want to put into my toolbox, as it were. I felt that it was really non-confrontational, but it was a way to see things from other people's perspectives. It kind of took the ability of anybody to take control of the conversation, because you have to bounce off the questions as they were coming forward. So it was really enjoyable, and I think that I certainly use it because it brings quite a holistic set of questions that you need to answer before you can even think about the solution.
Exactly. Well, and the other interesting part of your response is that taking time to really dissect something is not something we do. No. And when I tell people, put your cell phone away, don't look at your computer inbox right now, it's so hard for us to do that. I mean, I've had people that sort of snuck their phone down in their lap while they were on this question storming session, because we're so distracted. And this multitasking thing, for me, it's way out of hand. I'm not any good at it. So I really like, put this stuff away just for an hour and see if you can really pay attention. And, we should do that in meetings, in-person meetings, in my opinion. Don't bring your phone with you, for God's sake. I mean, I know people have reasons for it, but I'm just saying our attention spans have diminished, and they've also, our intention to get something done has increased. So anyway, I appreciate your comments, Haley. I'm glad you liked it. Heather Booth, can you introduce yourself and tell us your insights?
I'm Heather Booth. I live in Washington, D.C. For my life, I have my grandchildren, family, friends, theater, book clubs, probably of equal importance. And my work is that I run very large-scale social change national campaigns, from either strategic advisor or direct immigration reform, financial reform, investments. Almost if you name the issue, I may have worked on it. Civil rights, women's rights, many other things. and political campaigns at a large level. For this session, first, I just want to thank Sandra Bear, who's told me about it for a long time, and I've never fully understood it, and I'm so grateful that you created the opportunity to allow me to be part of it, and Pete, who I know you've been the partners in arranging this, and the tech staff to make it easier. I'm always nervous will I get the right link and know how to get it. So all the parts work, which is part of making a culture sustainable, that you have to
There you go.
the people understand how to use it. So I'm grateful for it. I thought it was a lot of fun, wonderful spirited, and just having this break from the intensity of our ongoing lives. I thought there were some things that were achieved sort of at a meta level of having a moment to question our assumptions, to ask, are there other assumptions we need to look at, hearing many voices, and finding interesting things that people said, some that were unexpected and some I felt quite aligned with and felt I'd love to follow up had we been in one room, you know, around tea or something in the break. I'd say, so what do you do? So where do you go? I thought particularly the issues of that actually we didn't use the word during the question storming, but I think the power questions of who decides, who defines, how do we participate, how do we change, how do we deal with challenges, that are what are the power relations for all the diversity, beauty, conflicts that we have. I found the most, the most resonant and staying with me. I had a couple of thoughts. I was trying to figure out, how would I use this? Would I use this actually in very practical work? I could imagine using it sort of as an icebreaker to get into a discussion. And I also think that, and at least for the work that I do, where I'm often trying to bring together very diverse interests, is that if there's some perhaps sharper framework on the clarity of the question, so that it's not just an abstraction, which for all of us, we came in and it was more, I mean, this isn't exactly the question. Some of us may actually be working on this particular question, but more as an example of how to take the process. I find in bringing together very diverse groups, even more diverse than we are, that starting with a clarification of what are the values that unite us. I'm suggesting some questions that we didn't need to use, but just thinking about, if you're already clarified, what are the values that unite us? What are the goals that we actually want to achieve together? And what are the norms by which we will operate internally? Just throwing that out, that when those three questions are answered, and actually I leave them up on the wall when the group meets so we can always review them, that then I think it would make the question storming have real practical consequence, as I was trying to think about how would I use it in the real world.
Yes.
So that in addition to being a lovely way to have spent this part of a day, which I found really fun. There are just some thoughts on how I might use it practically.
Well, thank you. Thank you. When Lawrence Jones and I, Dr. Jones and I first started the process around trust, Heather, we asked people to become trust ambassadors. So now what we're asking is for you to become a question storming ambassador. I mean, you can do question storming with your children and your husband, or your wife and your, you can use this process to say, don't answer this question right away. Let's talk about, what's the complexity here. And I think I really like your ideas of, the values, the goals, the norms. That's really a sort of a grounding or a stage setter, if you will, for how you could use it in your work. And I have recommended, I've had a few people say to me they used it with a small neighborhood group, to assess a problem that was much more, as you say, much more real or authentic or personal in terms of their work. And I was talking to Pete earlier after our question storming session. This question evolved over time, and I think it was a bit too abstract. But as I say, you all parsed it and dissected it in interesting ways. So I feel like there was still value from that. But I love your approach.
Yes, and that's why I started with appreciation, because I do feel that, and perhaps with a group as diverse as we are, we needed something at this level of conception. I was just saying how I was then trying to use it. So I think this worked well for opening up our minds to a new process.
Right. Well, thank you for that. And Heather, one of the things that happened with us when we were doing these question storming sessions around how to rebuild trust was that nobody knew anybody. And they were from all over the world and all different countries and cultures and political philosophies, if you will. But there was some level of a bond amongst us, it's sort of like, well, I'd like to have tea with all of you. And, I think there's something about taking time to ask questions of each other rather than just having a meeting. Somebody presents an idea, they come up with answers, and you walk out the door. So hopefully that's another part of the value here, is that there's a willingness to listen and not just give answers. So Nicole, you're next, and then Hope, and then we're going to close out pretty soon. So just a little bit longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. So hi everyone, I'm Nicole Hynek, and my company's Hynek Associates. So in my day job, I'm focused on digital marketing and visual communications. And then my other hat
speak just a little louder. I'm so sorry. Just a little louder.
I'll come a bit closer as well, that might help. So my business is digital marketing and visual communications, so helping people to get their message out through social media, photography, film. But my other hat that I wear is I'm a PhD researcher, and so I'm in the School of Psychology, and I'm looking at how we can improve lifetime working outcomes for autistic adults, because we have a terrible kind of global outcome statistically for that cohort. So I'm especially interested in organisational culture. And so I think really what bridges those two things is my passion for data, looking for evidence-driven ways of making connections between either audiences or communities or might be customer bases, however we do that, but collecting data and being very strategic about how we look at that and then interpret that to make decisions and build evidence-based strategies across those two channels. I loved this session so much. I've never done anything like it before. It was a truly fascinating way of focusing creativity, and especially working in a creative industry, we are trained to produce results and answers very quickly without actually considering the consequences, necessarily the short and long-term consequences of those decisions for clients, because your job is to know it all and have the answers. So I feel that through this process, it was amazing to experience this question through so many eyes, because I think we brought quite a richness in terms of our understanding of culture together. I myself was raised between two cultures, so two languages, two countries, and it's been my job in this lifetime to integrate that experience and to find my way and unite the two things. And so for me, when I was asking those questions, I had in mind, okay, so it's food, it's language, it's family, but also it's arts, it's music, it's theatre, and it's so many different dimensions to culture. And then of course we've got organisational culture, as well as workplace customer service cultures and all of those different strands. So I think that in terms of what I've learned, would I apply this? Absolutely. I could see a significant application with it working with participants, because one of the challenges that we face as researchers is when we ask a question, naturally people want to give you solutions, they want to give you answers, but actually when you're dealing with maybe a complex question such as employment and improving employment outcomes, we need to ask an awful lot more questions from our stakeholders before we can consider how to integrate that into interventions and solutions. So I think that through this process, you can actually subvert an awful lot of kind of post hoc conflict which can come about through, let's build a solution, let's build an intervention and run it, and then you find out that you've missed a group of stakeholders, you've drowned out one group of voices, because through asking these questions you're inviting people to bring their perspectives forward. So it was a tremendous kind of broadening of insight there, and just a wonderful experience that I will keep with me. It was really, really amazing.
I'm thrilled to hear your response. Thank you so much. And you know, here's my question for all of you. In fact, I want an answer pretty quickly. So when Pete and I try to recruit people to do this, I'm sure, Heather, you and I have talked about this. You don't really understand the power of it until you do it. And it's so hard for me to explain to people, oh, well, yeah, you just asked a bunch of questions. Well, where the hell is the solution? And that sounds stupid to me. I mean, I've gotten those responses. People don't understand it. And so, Nicole, especially for you, I mean, I wonder if in some organization or a group of people that you can assemble, you know, figure out how you can explain the value of this and also convince people to try it, because it's sort of like once you try it, you like it kind of thing. And each of us, I'm sure, sees applications for this in different ways. But really, if any of you have ideas about how you get people to say, it's almost like a marketing campaign, to tell you the truth, you know, come and do question storming, it'll change your life. You know, I mean, that's not going to work. But anyway, I'm asking for your help, the group's help, if you will, to say, what is it that we would tell people that would get them to join a session, especially like Heather pointed out, you know, it's not a burning question in her work and her life. I mean, it's an interesting question, and I think intellectually we could maybe all relate to that, but I'd appreciate any guidance.
I think
Have
Hope
to think.
still needs to.
Pardon me?
Hope hasn't gone yet for her go.
No, I know. Well, Hope is next. Okay, go ahead, Hope, and then we'll throw it open to a few more recommendations from each of you.
All right, sounds good. Well, hi there. My name is Hope de Longchamp, and I am currently based in Montreal, Canada. So I predominantly work with the music and culture scene. So that really looks like communicating with individuals and then helping those individuals communicate with others in various forms, from radio, publications, social media, and other digital marketing strategies, which I mainly do through a creative studio called Social Current. So what I particularly really loved, honestly, about this event was communicating with the other individuals in this really open and accepting environment. It was really great to, you know, hear perspectives and make myself question how I know culture, community, and even like sustainability as it stands. So, I mean, culture to me was a state of belonging, but after going through this entire process, I learned that it's a larger, greater thing. We asked questions about how to, you know, remove the city from the culture, vice versa, and then wondered about whether that would even be possible.
Right.
So I really did love hearing, questioning, learning about how we could really explore diversity in cities across the world by looking at questions and then dissecting those very specific questions in order to create even more questions. I mean, it was just overall powerful to know that we are far more similar than we are different, but solely through the power of questions.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Hope. I really appreciate your feedback. And just so you know, the sessions that we've done in the past have been much more diverse in terms of ethnicity, gender, age. We have done sessions with just young people, 16 to 20, which are also really revelatory because, you know, we were hoping to do one tomorrow about green spaces and, you know, what does your space look like in 5 years if you're 16 years old? They've got a different answer than we have. I promise you that. So I think it's another way of exploring, as you say, Hope, you know, exploring this question in a really more thoughtful way. So I do want to tell you a couple things and then get your final ideas about what we've done today. I will do a write-up. It's not solutions. I'm sorry, Haley, but it's it's actually sort of a replication of some of the questions you asked, and I don't put them all down because I think there were over 200. But I will sort of talk about your questions and your insights. I would like you to become a question storming ambassador for me and for Pete and for anybody, frankly, that says, you know, let's solve problems in a different way. I used to go to so many meetings and, you know, as I said, someone would talk and we would all listen. And, you know, if it was my boss, he'd say, well, Sandra, what are you going to do about this? And I'd give him an answer. And, you know, and it just, this is not that. And so I think COVID inspired us to think differently about some things, our health, our well-being, you know, our economy, our work, our lives. I feel like there was some good that came from COVID, sort of raising awareness to do things differently. And that's what we did today. The final quote I wanted to leave all of you with is from Buckminster Fuller. He's a big presence in my life. I've read all of his books. And one of the quotes he has that's really appropriate to today is that you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To really change something, you must build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So I think we're all about finding new models where whatever our work or life are about, we're trying to do that. So any final comments, any final ideas, anything good to say?
I think one thing, sorry. I was just going to say one thing that strikes me about the process of question storming is that we've sort of been historically taught that to question is to dissent, and that to challenge is actually to detract from authority. But I think this process has shown us that without introducing ourselves and without knowing who and what we are, what we do, we were all at that level where we felt like we could ask that question. Yeah. And I think that the one really powerful tool, or maybe what makes it such a powerful tool, is that it democratizes that process of meeting a challenge through challenging it. And that's powerful.
Well, isn't it interesting too? Thank you for that. And it's really important not to give your titles and credentials ahead of time, or you know, in the meeting, because I think it does intimidate some people. My dear friend Heather Booth is world famous, frankly, of what she's done as an organizer for years. And you know, if you knew that about her before we got on this call, you might go, wow, she really knows, she knows this better than I ever would. Maybe I won't be so free and open and willing to ask crazy questions, or questions that are you know, different from what you might normally try to do. And actually, Zoom is also another good asset in that terms. Don't you think that we're not hidden, but we're also not face to face, eyeball to eyeball, and so maybe there's some value to that as well. But I appreciate that. Any other thoughts?
I put some thoughts to answer your prior question in the chat of how to explain it to people if there's an interest in making it of repeated use as opposed to a one-off lovely experience, which it was for me, and I think for many of us, but maybe of course all of us.
Yeah, well, you know, it's again, the day-to-day demands of our work keep us from doing this, and it could be shortened greatly. I mean, you could spend, you know, an hour total doing this, I think, with maybe a 5-minute break in between or something. But you're right, Heather. I think this idea of an icebreaker to sort of build that relationship and set the stage and then ask that question and let people just keep asking. That's a good idea. Thank you.
I mean, I could see using this, as I said, in organizational meetings that are the start of, for building the trust, for asking the questions. I might create a framework for it first, so there's clarity about what we're doing. I'm just saying this is in my world. Each of us are in somewhat different worlds.
Well, Carola had to leave, but she said there was no agenda. And I'm like, well, intentionally, there's no agenda. But that's different than what you just said about sort of setting a framework. So
I can see using it within that. I'm just suggesting some of the things I suggested, as well as I thought what Nicole said about sort of a democratizing equal level process was one of the great benefits of it. But I think there might be, if you thought about end uses, I'm just suggesting as a way to think about how to engage other people to want to use it.
Yeah.
To think about their end use, how within their world might they use it, and in explaining it to fit in like that.
Yeah,
anyway,
but
thank you for creating the space.
Oh, my pleasure to be with all of you. I think, Pete, does everyone have everyone's email, or are you all okay with that if you wanted to communicate with each other? And of course, there's LinkedIn. So
yeah, well, I would encourage anyone to join on LinkedIn, but I think we'll just send out a little bit of a thank you for joining us note, and unless you put your hand up or tell me otherwise, we will put your emails in the CC line as opposed to the BCC line, which means that you all will have the ability to pick up the others. And I just wanted to add a couple of things from our end, actually, if that's okay, Sandra.
Yes, of course.
I think one of the great things about Question Storming, one of the reasons I was drawn to it in the first place, is because it really does strike at the heart of everything we're trying to do with the whole Business Insights project. And actually, we've invited you into this particular session, which is part of the International Festival of Innovation and Business that we run. I think, you know, this is an innovative process, but you may or may not have noticed as we've been going out over these 2 days, there's a lot of other stuff going on, and Sandra was doing a whole thing actually in a more conventional way about placemaking a little bit this morning. I would just put it out there, if any of you want to get involved and help us run that project, we really want to try and make it as diverse internationally, I'm thinking when I say that, but I don't just mean internationally, of course, I mean in every sense of the word, covering as much ground, because it's a whole thing about getting communications going across boundaries. And you know, it does take a little bit of energy and time and effort, but we find that it's very rewarding for those who want to get involved. So I think, you know, when I email you, if you just say, if you want to put your hand up and say, I'd love to get a bit more involved in developing some of this content, then just do that, because we have a steering group of which Sandra's a part that meets on a regular basis. And we also have an international SME network, which again, we're looking at how to get peer-to-peer businesses talking across boundaries. So I just put that out there and flag it up. Specifically, I'm guessing for Hayley and Rachel, as certainly Rachel is well aware, we're regional in the UK as well, and we're in North Somerset in the southwest of the UK in March. We started back after COVID in October in the Bristol Bar Science Park, and Sandra, bless her, got on an airplane, came and joined us and said, no, I'm going to do Question Storming live in person with the people. We go, brilliant. And you know, that was great. And that was the first time I'd experienced Question Storming in person, face to face. Now, I'm aware that Sandra's got a little bit of surgery on your shoulder coming up, and that may or may not allow you to rejoin us in the southwest in Somerset. But placemaking is a huge part of the dialogue down there, and we're looking forward potentially to inviting Sandra to come in and run this session on the ground there. We are committed, I think, as an organisation, this is across the shows and the Business Insights project, to running Question Storming and Solution Storming within every project we do, whether that's live on the ground or online on the international side, simply because it does so many things at once. It allows you to explore a space without the conflict areas, which obviously is something we know. But it does more than that, because it also has a bonding effect, which Sandra referred to earlier. And if you can imagine us on the ground in a live location show looking at a subject area, and we're deliberately inviting people into that. You know, someone's a council, someone's a chief executive of a business, someone's a youth worker, and these are people who, you know, may or may not have their view on how the other one works, but you put them in a room and do question storming, and you shut all that down, and you get into the issue, and the people come out of that room in a slightly different place to the way they went in, and that is important for us when we're on the ground, so it's part of what we do. So there you go. So that's my input. So if you want to get more involved with what we do, whether it's locally in the UK or on the international, we do the international twice a year, so that's fine. Let me know. Happy to have that conversation in a better way. And that's me, really. Sandra, have you got anything you want to wrap up with?
No, just another big thank you to each of you. Thank you so much for your time. I know how difficult it is to give that up, because we're all busy, but I so appreciate it. And we'll be back in touch.
We will, we most certainly will. And I'll drop you a note after this, which will get everybody talking to each other. And so kind of as an absolutely final paragraph, thank you so much for your time. It's not a small commitment. We really appreciate it. I'm glad to hear most of you found it a valuable moment. And yeah, any further input, whether that's specifically about question storming or more broadly about where it all goes from here, I'm all ears. Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.